Okay, Chav Chesam Beis 28b. A little bit of a more of a regular style Gemara today, and interesting one. Okay, we're at the Mishnah on 28b. Chav Chesam Beis. Ha'ish mader es benai benazir, ve'ein ha'isha maderes es benah benazir. A man can make his son a nazir before he's an adult, but a woman cannot make her son a nazir. Ketzad, what's an example of this? And we'll explain in the Gemara what exactly the reason is for this. There's two different reasons, and the Gemara will go back and forth, equivocating between the reasons. Okay, so where are we? Okay, Ketzad. Gilach, let's say, okay, so in other words, a father can make his son a nazir. Let's say his son rejects the nazirus. Gilach, he cuts his hair. Aishigalchu kraivav, or his relatives cut his hair. Micha, he protests. Aishimichu kraivav, or his relatives protest. So in any of those scenarios, the nazirus is over. So in other words, if you make your son a nazir, then not only can your son protest the nazirus, but the relatives can protest it as well, and the nazirus is over. If you had an animal that was separated, so what do we do? Like we saw yesterday and past week already. The chatas is killed. The oila is brought as an oila, the shlam is brought as a shlam, except that it's brought as a shlam of a nazir, which means that it has only one day to be in. But it is eaten for one day, or does not require bread, since he isn't actually a nazir. What happens if he has money that wasn't specified? So the halacha is, like we saw yesterday and like we saw the past week, it goes for oilas kayetz mizbeach. Mois mefaroshin, if you have specified funds, so achat is yelchul yam hamelach. Loinen v'lemoyelin. So the money that goes to the chatas you can't use, so that goes into the Mediterranean. Loinen v'lemoyelin. You can't benefit from it, and you can't be moil on it. The may ayla, the money of the ayla, yaviu ayla umaylan b'hem. The money of the ayla is brought as an ayla, and because you can use it, so therefore there's me'ilah. Shlam yaviu shlam menachal miyam echad ve'ein tu'unin lechem. And the shlam are used to bring a shlamim, but what type of shlam? The shlam of a nazir, which is only eaten for one day. Okay, now. This concept, it seems that only a man can make his son a nazir. Where does that come from? So the Gemara says, ish in, aval isha loy. A man can, a woman cannot. My time. What's the reason? And the reason here really is also a question of where does this whole thing come from? Is there a pasuk that indicates a verse that indicates you can make your son a nazir? So the Gemara says, it's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So we've seen yesterday, we've seen previously, this idea that mois tumen yiplu in a dava could also possibly be a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. There was a certain oral tradition revolving around different laws of nazir, and this is one of them. One of the traditions is that a father can make his son a nazir, and that's the tradition. To say in Hebrew zehu, that's nothing more than that. Rabbi Chanina says in the name of Rish Lakish, he has a completely different reasoning. He says the argument is because so that you can be mechanachem. In other words, there's an idea of chinuch. What is chinuch? Literally, the word chinuch is to break something in, to get a child used to performing mitzvahs even before he's an adult. So Rish Lakish says part of chinuch is that you can teach him the laws of Nazir by making him a Nazir. Okay, now if it's just a matter of chinuch, of teaching a child what it's like to be a Nazir, so the Gemara has a list of questions on Rish Lakish, and list of questions plus a little bit more, and that basically takes us to the end of the day. Okay, so let's see the questions. So first question is Ihachi afilu ishanami. Why can't the mother make him a Nazir? Why is it only his father? His mother is also obligated to teach him mitzvahs. So the Gemara says the opinion of Rabbi Chanina, the name of Rish Lakish is Kasavar ish chayav l'chanach b'nei b'mitzvahs ve'ena isha chayeves l'chanach es b'nah. the obligation to teach a child how to perform mitzvahs is the father's obligation and not the mother's. Okay. According to Rabbi Yehudah that says it's an oral tradition. That's why, well, obviously the tradition is what we accepted as a tradition. So we've accepted tradition that you can make your son into a Nazir, but not your daughter. And that's the tradition. It's not like we can come and argue why is there a difference. But if the reason is chinuch, to teach a child, el Rish Lakish, according to Rabbi Chanina and Rish Lakish, afilu bitay, why can't you make your daughter into a Nazira, just like you can make your son into a Nazir? So the Gemara says, Kasavar, he holds, B'noi chayav l'chanchai, bitay ein chayav l'chanchai. Okay, this is a very difficult obligation. Gemara, briefly, the Gemara is saying that a person is obligated to teach his son to perform mitzvahs, but not his daughters. Now, you might think the reason for that is because, by and large, the males have more mitzvahs to perform than females. That's because any mitzvah that's time sensitive is an obligation for males only, with the exception of a few mitzvahs like eating matzah and Pesach, etc. Okay, so that would be the logic. The problem, though, is that the Mishnah in Yoma says that parents are obligated to teach a daughter to fast on Yom Kippur. It's clearly a positive mitzvah, and a woman could become a Nazir as well, and a Zira as well. So this clearly is an obligation to teach your daughter how to do mitzvahs, even though the amount of mitzvahs she can do is less than your son's. Taisa says there must be a difference, but he doesn't tell you what the difference is. So, and Taisa then has a bunch of inconsistencies. That this seems to be very inconsistent with many other Talmudical statements. So there must be a difference, but I don't know what the difference is. Okay, just pointing it out. Bishlem Rabbi Yehudah. According to Rabbi Yehudah again says it's a halacha l'moshe Messinai, an oral tradition. To Amar halacha ben Nazir, it says to halacha ahachi, for that reason ben Nazirus in ben Adaram loy. Therefore, the tradition teaches us that a man can make his son into an Nazir, but according to Rish Lakish, it's just to prepare him as an adult because he might accept a Nazirus. So why just a Nazirus? Maybe he'll accept a Neder also. So he should practice doing the Nadarim too. So Gemara says you're right. El Rish Lakish, according to Rish Lakish, I feel in the Nadarim nami loy. I feel in the Nadarim nami. Even the Nadarim we should have to practice. Simar says, you're right. Lomi boy kamar. The Mishnah is saying not only that, also this. In other words, Lomi boy b'nedarim de less evil. Not just nedarim. You give him an easy neder. You tell him, I don't know, don't stand on a chair for a whole day, or don't drink seltzer. So those things, there's no nivel. There's no, the amount of pain and the fact that you don't have to shave his head at the end. Alafilu ben Naziris, even Naziris isli nivel, we'll end up with a shaved head. Even Naziris, you need to prepare him for mitzvahs. In other words, according to Rish Lakish, not only does the father have to prepare a son for Naziris, he also has to prepare him for Neder. Okay. And now we get to the part of concluding the Neder. So this is obviously going to run us into a lot of trouble. Well, the Mishnah clearly indicates to us that there theoretically is a process by which he can conclude the Neder, meaning that we spoke about him separating sacrifices. Now, in the Mishnah's case, we didn't end up bringing them because he was protesting. Let's say he didn't protest them. Would he bring the sacrifices? Again, if it's all rabbinical, then all those sacrifices aren't really sacrifices. And that's the Gemara's next step to deal with all those problems. And it gets pretty dicey according to Rish Lakish, a pretty extreme position. The Gemara keeps on adding on more and more extreme positions to Rish Lakish. Okay. So Bishlem or Rabbi Yehudah, according to Rabbi Yehudah, the Amar halachi ben Nazir, he says it's a tradition. So it makes sense that the tradition teaches us that if you protest, then the Naziris is not valid. That's the tradition. Okay, El Rabbi Chanina, Amar Rish Lakish, according to Rabbi Chanina, in the name of Rish Lakish, Kol Kaminam. Why is it that if the relatives protest, all of a sudden the Naziris is not valid? Is there an equivalent concept somewhere where we find that if the father is teaching his sons to do mitzvahs, and somebody, a relative, protests, all of a sudden he becomes exempt? Why does a relative's protest make a difference if it's the father's obligation to teach the son how to perform mitzvahs? So the Gemara says, Kasavar, his opinion is kol chinuch d'lo choshev lo nichalei. 1 second. Okay, so in other words, the opinion of Rish Lakish is that, obviously chinuch is teach your son how to do mitzvahs. These are things that, sort of the regular mitzvahs, but Naziris comes with a shaved head at the end, and it could be very embarrassing. And in that situation, it could be that Rish Lakish would hold that the father is exempt from the mitzvah of chinuch. So if that's determined either by the child himself or by the relatives, and it's embarrassing, so in that case, the father is not obligated to be mechanech his son, and therefore the Nazirus is invalid. Okay. Now we get more examples of the conclusion of the Nazirus. So let's say he does actually conclude it. According to Rabbi Yehudah, it says it's a tradition. If it's a halacha l'moshe Sinai, it's considered almost the equivalent of a mitzvah d'oraisa. So therefore, it makes sense. Therefore, it makes sense at the end of a Nazirus, a Nazir shaves his head. Now, what's the problem with shaving your head? Torah has a mitzvah. You cannot shave the pa'as zakoncha. You can't shave the corner of your beard, which, according to the Gemara, means the areas, the side of the head. Now, if you shave your whole head, you're shaving off the pa'as, corners. Now, if you're a real Nazir, it's permitted. Why is it permitted? Because we have a concept called essay, a positive commandment. Pushes away a negative commandment. The positive commandment is that a Nazir has to shave his head. The negative commandment is that a person should not shave his head, should not shave his payas. So we say essay say. But according to Rish Lakish, that the whole idea of the Nazir of a child, the Nazir of the father to a child, is an idea of chinuch. It's only rabbinical in nature. If that's the case, how can you shave his head? You're violating a biblical commandment to fulfill a rabbinical Nazirus. One second. Okay. And it makes sense according to Rabbi Yehudah. According to Rabbi Yehudah, that says that it's a halacha. It's halacha l'moshe Sinai. It's roughly the same as a d'oraisa, as a biblical commandment. That's what it makes sense. It makes sense that at the conclusion of the Nazirus, you can shave his head and cut off the payas. According to Rish Lakish, the purpose is to be mechanechem. It's a rabbinical commandment, rabbinical framework. How is he permitted to cut off his head, cut off all his hair? He's violating a Torah commandment of hakafa. So Gemara says, "Kasavar hakafas kol haroish midrabanan, v'chinuch midrabanan, v'aschinuch drabanan, v'dochi hakafa drabanan." Okay, so Rish Lakish has an interesting opinion. He says, when are you? There's a debate in the Gemara. The Torah says you can't cut off your payas. Does this mean that you can't just cut off your payas, but the rest of your hair is regular, or does it mean that the payas can't be cut off? I'm saying, does it either it means that there's a prohibition of just cutting off the payas. In other words, if you leave everything else on and you just cut off the payas, you violated the prohibition. The more simple version is that you're not allowed to cut payas. Whether or not you cut all your hair, or whether or not you cut part of your hair, it doesn't make a difference. Samara says as follows: according to Rish Lakish, would say that if you cut off all your hair, there's no violation of a sakifu pasakanecha. In other words, if you cut off all your hair, then the prohibition of cutting off payas is not there. In other words, the prohibition of cutting off payas is only if you just cut off the payas. if you cut off everything, it's only rabbinical. Because it's rabbinical, so the rabbinical Nazirus pushes away the rabbinical prohibition on shaving your entire head. Because the biblical restriction is when you shave just the pass. Okay. We together? Okay. Bishleim Rabbi Yehudah and Amar Halachi ibn Nazir. Ahachi Migaleach Ma'asi Carbon. According to Rabbi Yehudah, that says that there's a halacha by Nazir. Ahachi Migaleach Ma'asi Carbon. Therefore, 1 second. According to Rabbi Yehudah, that says it's a halacha by Nazir. So therefore, it makes sense that he brings his karbanos at the conclusion of his Nazirus. According to Rabbi Yehudah, the name of Rish Lakish, the purpose is to teach him how to perform mitzvahs. How could you bring a karban? Rabbinically, you're not biblically. This kid is a regular kid. There's nothing unique about him. Rabbinically, we turn him into an Nazir. So how could he bring karbanos into the Beis Hamikdash when these karbanos aren't even sanctified? Because the only reason why they're sanctified is because he thinks he's a Nazir, but he's not really a Nazir. He's a rabbinical Nazir. So why is it not bringing chulin ba'azara? You're bringing unsanctified animals into the Beis Hamikdash. So the Gemara says, "Kasavar," the opinion of Rish Lakish is chulin ba'azara lav da'araisa. That bringing chulin into the azara is not a violation of a biblical prohibition. So until now, from learning Nazir and the Dharam, we always took on for a simple understanding that chulin ba'azara is a significant prohibition. Now we're saying no. Not only is the chulin ba'azara not a significant prohibition, actually chulin on the mizbeach isn't a significant prohibition. It's the same. It's not only chulin ba'azara, it's also chulin on the mizbeach. And not only that, you're allowed to eat it. Because obviously you're going to bring it as a korban, you're going to put it on top of his back, and then you're going to eat it. You're going to eat the leftovers. All of it is only rabbinical. All of that's only rabbinical. So like I said, it gets more extreme. Okay. Fine. Okay, let's continue onward. Now, let's say the guy gets tamei, right? Same problem again. According to Rabbi Yehudah, I understand. The Amar Halachi ibn Nazir, it says that this idea of Nazir is a halacha l'moshe Sinai, effectively a very similar category to a d'oraisa, biblical prohibition. So therefore, ahachi ki mitma, if it becomes tamei, ma'asi karban siparin v'achal kayin malika. It makes sense that he brings these two birds. 1 second. Let's check this. Second. Okay, as follows. 1 second. Okay, if somebody becomes tamei, they have to bring two birds, echad l'chatas, echad l'oila, plus an asham as an animal. Those two birds. Okay, so today, if your person wants to eat a bird, what does he need to do? He needs to slaughter it. He shechts the bird, takes a knife, and he slices through the trachea and the esophagus, and typically the jugular veins as well, and that makes the bird permitted to eat. Now, in the Beis Hamikdash, when a bird is being performed as a sacrifice, there's a concept called malika. The kohanim would grow very strong thumbnails, and they would sever the spinal cords from the back of the animal using their thumbnail. That process is called malika. Malika is not considered kosher for shchita. if tomorrow, let's say I decided to go take a chicken and grow my thumbnail and sever the spinal cord from the back, it's not just the spinal cord. You're also severing I should point this out. You're also typically what is done is that the veins are brought to the back, and in other words, he's slicing through the jugulars, the esophagus, and the trachea. It came perfect time.
Do what?
I said you came perfect time.
Oh, okay. Show me. It sounds really appetizing. I'm glad I
absolutely. So the trachea, the esophagus, and the jugulars are brought to the back of so they're sort of loose in the front, and you would move them around to the back of the spine and slice through all those organs and veins, and then you'd push the nail through the spinal cord. That process is called malika. Malika is not a kosher shechita. If you're not in the temple and you're not performing a sacrifice, malika is to make something an avela. It is not kosher. Shechita is considered as if an animal was killed with a bullet. No difference. It only works in the case of korban. So you have a major problem here. According to Rish Lakish, what's going to happen? The guy becomes tamei. He brings 2 birds for a korban. The kohen is going to do malika, because in the Beis Hamikdash they don't do shechita on birds. They only do malika on birds. So he performs malika, and then he eats one of the birds. Well, 1 second here, we have a major problem. How could he eat one of the birds? It was never slaughtered. If it was a korban, it was a real korban. So you say, okay, because malika works for korban, you're allowed to eat it as well. But this we're saying is not a korban; it's just a regular bird. It's chulin, because the premise of the korban is it's chatos for becoming tamei for a nazir. But you're not really a nazir, and your tumah never made a difference. So in truth, the animal biblically is chulin. There's no sanctification to this korban chatos whatsoever. So how can you eat the chatos if there was malika done to it? It's an avela. It's non-kosher food. It's no different than if you shot it with a bullet. So, okay, now according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's a halacha l'Moshe Messinai, which means that you are really a nazir, and therefore you are, because you're really a nazir, the korbanos are in the realist sense real. They're actually korbanos, they're sanctified, and therefore if you do malika, the korban is valid, and the kohen's allowed to eat it. According to Rish Lakish, you're eating an animal that was shot dead, effectively, because it's no different. I'll give you a little. We're on 29a, and 12 lines off, 15 lines off the bottom of the page. First one line is Lakish. I'll go back and review in just a moment. Let me just finish this, and I'll go back and bring you up to speed. Okay, so the Gemara says Kasavar. Okay, Kasavar Rabbi Yehudah. As Taisus points out, the name Rabbi Yehudah is quite often the name of an Amora, a Talmudical scholar. This Rabbi Yehudah is clearly a Tana, a Mishnah scholar. And his opinion is that according to biblical law, you do not need to slaughter a bird. What you need to do is snuff out, just kill it, basically. Okay, the chulin ba'azara lav da'araisa, and also chulin could be brought in the azara. So Rish Lakish says that obviously the animal is chulin, it's chayil, it's not sanctified. It could be brought into the azara, and also if you kill it effectively, with no different than not how the halacha follows. Okay. So let's get you up to speed. Okay, so let's just review here quickly, and then we'll really moving on to the next segment of the Gemara. Okay, so we learned in the Mishnah that a father can make his son into a nazir, a mother cannot make her son into a nazir. And similarly, the word son here is specific; it refers to a son, not a daughter. And we have 2 reasons why is and if the son doesn't want to become a nazir and he protests in his ears, or he cuts his head anyway, he goes for a haircut, which is prohibited if you're a nazir, then the naziris is invalid. Where is the source of this concept? According to Rish Lakish, it's a halacha l'Moshe Messinai. It's an oral tradition. It effectively has, according to Rabbi Yochanan, according to Rabbi Yochanan, this is an oral tradition, halacha l'Moshe Messinai, effectively almost the same set of laws as if it were biblically ordained. According to Rish Lakish, this is about chinuch. It's about teaching your son how to perform it. The entire thing is one rabbinic spiel, right? It's a Purim spiel. It's a game. Who's this year? Who's going to dress up as a Nazir? Charles, you going to do that? Dress up as a Nazir this year. Okay. Anyway, right in. And the Gemara went back and forth.
Rabbi, I wouldn't risk doing that because then I might accidentally be taught. Become a Nazir. I don't want to do that.
Okay, so the Gemara went back and forth. The different problems with becoming with Rish Lakish's opinion. It seems that Rish Lakish's opinion is very difficult for numerous reasons, and the Gemara finally concludes that Rish Lakish sort of he goes with a bunch of opinions that we do not follow la halacha. Okay, and the final opinion was the opinion of Rabbi Yehudah, which we made two claims according to Rabbi Yehudah. Number one, that chulin can be brought into the Azara according to biblical law. There is no prohibition of bringing a non-sanctified animal. If you take your cow, it's a regular cow, it's 10 years old, and you take it for a walk inside the temple, it's perfectly permitted according to biblical law. And similarly, biblically, you'd be allowed to shoot a bird and kill it. Somebody's thinking about shotguns now.
Say what?
Somebody's thinking about shotguns.
Yeah. All the time.
According to one opinion, then you can use a shotgun, take down your choice of waterfowl, and be absolutely permitted. Well, rabbinically, it'd be prohibited, but that's not how the halacha follows anyway. Okay, so now the Gemara questions. So we're attributing these two opinions to the opinions of to Rabbi Yossi. B'sav Rabbi Yossi hachi, does Rabbi Yossi hold this way? V'atanya we learn. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehudah Aimer. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehudah says, I really should give a disclaimer here. I am not 100% sure that I completely get this Gemara, so hopefully I won't trip over myself. This small segment. Okay. Rabbi Yossi says, how do we know that a chatas ha'ayif comes for a suffix? In other words, if a guy is not sure if he sinned, he has to bring a chatas. I'm sorry. If somebody brings a chatas ha'ayif misafik, he brings in other words, he's not sure if he sinned, and he brings a chatas, a bird. Rabbi Yehudah teaches the bird is not eaten. Talmud loymar, 1 second. V'hazav esoyve l'zochar l'nekeva. A zochar is compared to a nekeva, a man to a woman. Magash nekeva l'zochar. Ma zochar may be korban al havadei, af nekeva may be korban al havadei. The Taisus points out this should be obvious, and there should be no need for a specific verse to tell me that just like a male brings a chatos if he eats chelav, for example, a female would bring a chatos if she eats chelav. That should be sort of obvious. In general, everything in the Torah, unless it's time related, is going to be the same for males and females. And there's many psukim that we'll learn about in Masechtas Kedushin specifically why that is, but that should be obvious. Okay, the real chiddush is the second category. Uma zochar mevi al safek, af nekeva mevi al safek. Just like a zochar, a male would bring a korban for a safek, meaning let's say the male was a zav, was tamei zav, and he was with a woman she's prohibited to be with. I'm sorry, let's say he's a safek zav. He's not sure if he's a zav. So he brings a safek korban, and therefore a woman, let's say a woman is the Gemara gives the example of a woman is a woman who's yeledes. We're not sure if she had a miscarriage. We're not sure if she miscarried a child, a fetus, or what the Gemara calls ruach, is ear, some sort of something else which wasn't yet fully formed as a child. It could also be that the question is whether the child is 40 days old, because before a child is 40 days old, there would not be a way. They would not be Thomas Yeladas. It could also be that we're talking here as maybe fibroids or something else. Anyway, okay. So just like a zachar brings a korban a suffix, so in a cave a female also does. Ma zachar minshu mevi alavade mevi al chatas al suffix. Af nekeva minshu mevi alavade she mevi alavade mevi al hasafik. The same sacrifice that they bring for a certain violation, they'd also bring for a suffix violation, a doubtful violation. If that's the case, ma zachar mevi korban v'nechal af nekeva mevia korban v'nechal. If that's the case, then just like the zachar's korban is eaten, So therefore, the nekeva suffix should also be in. So Gemara says no. Lo memanta b'zachar sheken iser echad. So nekeva shnei isurim. A male's carbon on suffix is only one violation. That's the Gemara at this point thinks it's chulin ba'azara. And therefore, that's a minor violation. In other words, it's rabbinical, and therefore you can eat the carbon. However, by female, it's two violations. Presumably, number one is that it's chulin bazar. Number two is that it's a bird, and it's malika. It's considered a nevela, a non-kosher bird. It's considered as if the animal was killed instead of slaughtered. So therefore, because it's two violations, we do not allow the kohen to eat it. Evidently, Rabbi Yehudah is makel with only one leniency. He holds chulin you can bring ba'azara, but you cannot eat a sacrifice that had malika if it wasn't really a sacrifice. If it's a real sacrifice because you're really obligated, then malika works. But if not, then there's no malika, and if not, there's no malika, and then and because there's no malika, therefore you shouldn't be able to eat it. So the Gemara says, "Ma'ishnei isurim." What are the two isurim we're talking about? Lav isur nevela b'chulin ba'azara. Must be we're talking about nevela and chulin ba'azara. Okay, so this seems to be that there is no such opinion that holds at both leniencies. Number one, that a bird does not need to be slaughtered biblically, and number two, that chulin can be brought in the azara biblically. So Gemara says, no, not necessarily. Ravacha the son of 29b, and we are 4 lines down. So Ravacha Breder Vika says a simple resolution. Maybe the problem here is that we're talking about two rabbinical prohibitions and not two biblical prohibitions. And Rabbi Yehudah is saying, even though I'll allow you to eat a chatas when you violate a single rabbinic prohibition, I won't when you violate two. Sort of the premise of the question that it must be that these are biblical violations is wrong. It could be rabbinical violations, and that the opinion of Rabbi Yehudah could be congruent with such a reality. Okay, let's continue. Okay. Let's say this debate between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, whether a Nazir, whether a father making his son into a Nazir is a halacha, a tradition, or whether it's an act of chinuch, it's teaching him the mitzvah of Nazirus. Let's say it's dependent on this other debate. What's this other debate? Okay, so this is a little bit of background here. We've seen it, I think, briefly in Adoram, the concept of mufla hasamach leish. We'll get to it a little bit later in the Masechta as well. Mufla hasamach leish means as follows: there is a period of where a child. So again, according to Torah law, you become an adult when you're 13 years old. Before the period that you're an adult, you're a minor. You're not responsible. Now, there is the Torah says that before somebody becomes an adult, there is a period called Einas Nedarim, where he's old enough to make Nedarim, where if he makes a Neder, his Nedarim are valid. And that happens maybe a year before he becomes physically mature, 12 years old roughly. And that is called Mufla Hasamach Lesh. Now, let's see over here. Let's continue. So let's see this debate, and we think this debate might align very well with the debate between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Ad Masai Madras B'nai B'Nazir. How old can your child be when you make him into a Nazir? Until how old? So the Gemara says, Achi Yavish Saras, until he becomes physically mature, puberty. Divrei Rabbi, 13 years old. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehudah says, Achi Yagia Lo Einis Nedarim, until he gets to the age of Nedarim. Meaning, let's say 12 years old, a little bit before he becomes old enough. My love, it must be Tanoi. This is the debate. The Rebbe Savar Halachi Ibn Nazir. Rebbe holds it's a halacha l'Moshe Messinai. Since it's a tradition, the tradition goes until 13 years old. like adulthood, like any other category. Even though he's old enough to make nedarim on his own, his father can still make nedarim, make him into a nazir. Until he becomes an adult. And according to Rabbi Yehudah's opinion, that it's until he becomes of age to make nedarim, 12 years old. So presumably he holds the purpose is to teach him how to perform mitzvahs. Once he's old enough to practice to make nedarim on his own, because once he's 12 years old, he can make his own neder. He can make his own naziris. So once he's old enough to make his own naziris, there's no need to teach him. He can do it on his own. And therefore Rabbi Yossi is like Rish Lakish that says that the whole purpose is to teach him to do mitzvahs. So Gemara says not necessarily. Amri loy. The kula alma halachi. For the first Gemara, the Gemara will resolve this in two ways. The Gemara says that it could be that everybody holds it's a halacha l'meishim we've seen in oral tradition, or it could be that everybody holds it's chinuch. It's to teach him how to perform mitzvahs. The Gemara goes through each side. So on the first side, let's say everybody holds halacha l'meishim v'sinei. The debate is with regard to this concept of oynas nedarim, the period where a child can make an eder. Rabbi Savar mufla hasamach leish midrabanan. Rabbi holds that that's a rabbinical concept. Even though there's a pasuk, the pasuk is considered what we call an asmachta. It's an additional support, but it's not actually a biblical derivation. The asida raisa dachid rabbanon, and therefore the biblical nature of the tradition is stronger than the rabbinical ability for the child to make his own nedarim. Rabbi Yehudah says he holds that biblically a child can make a neder from when he's 12 years old. Once he can make his own neder, so that's when the halacha l'meishim v'sinei says until that point you can make him into a nazir. After that point, he makes himself into a nazir. On the other side, on the other hand, another possibility is to say the opposite. Everybody holds the kula alma k'dei l'chanchem mitzvahs. The purpose of making your son into a nazir is to teach him the mitzvah of nazir. Umufla samach leish d'rabbanan. And the concept of oynas nedarim, once a child is 12 years old, that he can make his own nedarim, that's a rabbinical concept. Rebbe holds asi chinech d'rabbanan v'dochim mufla chasamach leish d'rabbanan. Rebbe holds that chinuch, the rabbinical nature of chinuch is. One second. Rebbe holds that the mitzvah of chinuch is stronger than the mufla samach leish. So in other words, you can actually teach your son how to become a nazir, even at the point when rabbinically he can make his own naziris. So therefore, you can make him into a nazir up to 13 years old. For Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehudah, the Amar at Shigil, Einis and Darim, Katsavar Lo Yasich Chenos Rabbanon V'Dachim Mufla Samach Leish. So in other words, the debate between Rabbi and Rabbi Yossi is what's stronger. Is the father's commandment to educate his child in how to become a nazir more important than the son's ability to make naziris on his own? According to Rabbi, it's more important. Chinuch, teaching your son, is more important. So therefore, you can make him a nazir even after the point where he can make himself into a nazir. And according to Rabbi Yossi, it's the opposite. According to Rabbi Yossi, the idea that your child can make himself into a nazir is more important than you teaching him naziris. So therefore, once he becomes 12 years old, he makes himself into a nazir. You can no longer make him into a nazir. Okay, we'll stop here. I'm ending a little bit early, ending a little bit on the Amud, the same Amud, the Amud of the Daf Yomi, not going ahead because we will have Daf Amud Gimel has no second Amud. We get to it, which will be there shortly. So it's just Taisus. Take a look. Amud Gimel Amud Beis. It's just Taisus. So therefore, I don't want to get too far ahead like we did in Nedarim. So we'll stay a little behind until we pass it, and then maybe go slightly ahead. Okay, have a great day.